You're listening to the Joe and Rosa Show, proclaiming the gospel through word and through song.
Hi, and welcome to the Joe and Rosa Show. I'm Joe Hopkins. This week, Rosa interviews Savannah Parvu. She's a writer and speaker who works with victims of human trafficking.
Today on the Joe and Rosa Show, we will be speaking with Savannah Parvu, and I'd like to welcome you to the show, Savannah. Thank you for being on the Joe and Rosa program today.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And so your testimony involves human trafficking, and I would just ask you to share your story with our listeners.
I can remember 5 years old. Both of my parents were drug addicts and alcoholics. I had two older brothers that were 8 and 10 years older than me. And from the time I was little, I was always told not to tell anybody what happened or taken to a bad place. But they never told me what the bad place was or that what they were doing was bad or what my parents were doing was bad. And so when I started school, I never told anybody about the drugs or alcohol because I knew I wasn't allowed to, but also because I didn't really know that it was bad because it was normal to me. My father had a stroke that left him disabled, and he wasn't able to communicate after that. And it was about a year later, my mom started getting involved in more drugs, and she started having an affair, and she moved out. And I went to live with her and her boyfriend at the time. And she was very open with me about what she was doing and about the drugs and alcohol. And she didn't hide what she was doing. I didn't want to tell anybody. And at that time, I had already learned about drugs at school. Not anybody, because I'd be taken to a bad place. And so during that time, I was being sexually abused by the drug dealers and people coming to the house that would do drugs with my mom and her boyfriend. And I would tell her about it, but she would tell me that there was nothing she could do because she would be in trouble if she did anything about it. And when I was 11, I went with my mom when she was prostituting herself. And I did that several times. But then there was one time I went with her, and the drug dealers offered her $10 for me instead of her. And she told them that that was fine and they could do whatever they wanted to me. And after that night, or after we left the house that night, I asked her why she let them do that to me. And she said because then she can get her drugs and she doesn't have to do anything, and they can just do it to me instead of her. And after that, it started happening on a regular basis where they would come and get me or she would take me there. And they would keep me for a couple of days, up to a week at a time. And they would sell me out to other people and then take me home. I never knew how long I was going to be gone or when I was going to see my mom again. When I wasn't with them, I was still in school, but nobody ever noticed that something was going on. Like in 8th grade, I would ask my teachers for detention so that I wouldn't have to go home after school. And they would let me stay, but they never asked why I didn't want to go home. If they asked, I don't know if I would have told them, but they should have noticed something, and I might have told them if they asked and tried to find out more. And when I was 13, I watched both of my parents try to commit suicide by cutting their wrists. It was then that I was taken to foster care. I didn't want to be there. I wanted to be with my mom. Even though all that happened, that was still the only life that I knew. I started cutting myself because I wanted to know what it felt like when my parents tried to commit suicide. Even though I didn't want to commit suicide, I just wanted to know what it felt like when they cut their wrists. After that, it became an addiction for me. Every time I would get upset or angry, I would cut myself, and the physical pain would help numb the emotional pain. And that pretty much became like the way I coped with things for the next 10 years. I went from group home to group home because nobody dealt with kids like me. Cutting wasn't like as common as it is now, so they thought that I was trying to commit suicide. And they ended up putting me in a residential treatment center for kids in foster care. And there, they would give me medicine to like make me behave, or it would make me like sedated. If I wasn't behaving, they would give me a shot to make me go to sleep. The staff at that group home, they were all friends, and I found out not long after I was there that they were also friends with my mom's drug dealers. And so they would take me to my mom's drug dealers where I would be sold, or they would come pick me up at night when the administrative staff wasn't there. So what my mom told me with bad place ended up being a bad place, because I would have rather been with her and that happening than at a place where I didn't like to be and I was treated way worse. So the cutting got worse while I was there. I did like more self-destruction with breaking my arm and anything. This brother got custody of me, and I went to live with him and his wife, but I hadn't had counseling or anything for what I had been through, so I didn't want to be with him. I still wanted to be with my mom. And so I didn't follow the rules or anything. I didn't want to go to school because I felt like nobody in my family graduated and I wouldn't either. I didn't really see a future for myself. The only life that I knew was what I saw. And so I spent a lot of time in my guidance counselor's office. She would spend time with me, and she wouldn't pressure me to answer questions, but she would ask me some things, and I slowly started telling her something. She ended up taking me to live with her and her family. I would go to church. That was like the first time I started learning about who God was, and I would go and I would listen, but I didn't really believe it. I had a hard time trusting people with what I had been through. When I ended up graduating high school, I started going to college. But when I was 22, I realized that I had to do something about the cutting. It had been almost 10 years, and I was still cutting, and it was just getting worse. My pastor preached a sermon, and it was titled Empty plus Jesus equals Full. And he talked about how we're empty, and we try to fill our lives with so many different things, but we can never be satisfied without God. And he used the example of like money, drugs, lust, just different things. He said that addictions doesn't just have to be drugs or alcohol. It can be anything that we can't do without. And it was then that I realized that the cutting was an addiction for me. So I went to him and told him that I was still cutting, and I felt like I couldn't tell anybody because everybody thought that I quit when I was 14 and I needed help. He suggested that I get an accountability partner and a mentor. So he set that up, and it was then that I started studying the Bible with that person, and I would read the Bible at home. And I had prayed to receive Christ when I was in high school, but I only did it because I knew that you had to say a prayer, but I didn't mean it. My life didn't change. So one night I was doing Bible study, and I read 2 Corinthians 5:17. If anybody is in Christ, they're a new creation. The old is gone and the new has come. And I realized then that I might have said a prayer, but I never surrendered my life to the Lord. Like nothing had changed. I wasn't new. And so it was that night that I prayed to receive Christ. I kept meeting with my accountability partner, and it took me about 9 months after that to stop cutting myself. I would talk about some of the things that happened, but I never talked about the sexual abuse or the trafficking with my mom selling me because I felt ashamed of it. Soon after I stopped cutting. I started speaking about it to youth groups about how I overcame it, because cutting seems very common now, and it's a problem for many middle and high schoolers. And I remember saying when I started doing that, I was talking about that, but I could never talk about the sexual abuse that happened. But I noticed, like, as time went on, I had to deal with it. And so I started going to therapy for the first time. About 2 months after I started, I went to visit my mother. I hadn't seen her in a couple of years, and she was supposed to be doing better. I walked into the house where she was. I ended up walking into a party and ended up being gang raped by people. That was 4 years ago. At that time, I felt like my past had been 13 years since I lived with her, and it happened, and it just happened again. And I felt God made me to be abused, and that was like my purpose, speaking and sharing my testimony before that. But after that night, I felt disqualified from doing anything for God. I continued going to counseling and working through the sexual abuse in that incident. I was able, from that event, to start talking to my therapist about everything that happened before. I didn't know what human trafficking was at the time. I went to a human trafficking event with some ladies from my support group that I was going to for victims of sexual assault, and I realized that what happened to me was human trafficking. At that event, I said to the ladies that were with me, I was like, I could never get up there and share my story, because there was a survivor sharing her story at the event. But after the event, I felt like God was telling me that this is the next step once I finish working through some more stuff in counseling. I ended up coming into contact with a group in Central Florida that they spread awareness to human trafficking. That I ended up sharing my story with them, and they asked me to speak at an event. And then from there, it's like God has just opened all these doors for me to share my story. And in doing that, there's been other people who have shared their story because they've heard mine. 2 years ago, I spoke at a women's conference, and there was a lady who, after everybody was gone, and she told me that she's 75 years old and never told anybody that her mom sold her too. And she said that she made excuses for her mom, but she just felt like she's lived in a prison all her life. And if I hadn't shared my story, she would have never told anybody that her mom sold her. I feel like what happened to me, God is using for good to spread awareness and to help other people share their story, and to know that just because something happened to them or they did something, it doesn't have to define their future. They can still overcome it, and God uses it for good. And I haven't seen my mom in 4 years since that incident, and I spent a lot of time angry at her and wanting something to happen to her so that, like, she would pay for what she did. But then I realized that no matter what happened to her, it wouldn't take away the pain that I felt, and it wouldn't make anything that happened to me, it wouldn't take any of that pain away. Realized that, like, the anger started lessening, and the pain, like, the way I saw my mom started changing, and God actually been showing me, I have compassion towards her now, because she spent her entire life being miserable, and she's just never happy, and she's ruined her life with the drugs and alcohol. And So I've forgiven her, but I've learned that forgiveness doesn't mean you have to be in a relationship with somebody. And so I don't know that I will, but I've forgiven her, and I'm at peace with where I am as far as my relationship or non-relationship with her goes.
Absolutely.
And so now I just share my story to raise awareness and help others know that they can rise above what's happening to them or has happened, and they can still do well in spite of it.
Absolutely. What are some of the warning signs that people can pick up on that something like this is happening, maybe to somebody that they know?
Some of it really depends based on like the age of the person. But if it's somebody who if they're a younger person that is in a relationship with somebody older, if they have like expensive items that they couldn't buy, and their boyfriend or whoever, if they tell you that they gave it to them, if it's somebody from another state or country or even city that doesn't have any type of identification with them, if they don't have like control of their own money, if like a lot of traffickers with a tattoo on their neck or somewhere that's visible, and so you see somebody with a tattoo like on, or somewhere that's visible, and it's like a name or a number or a barcode, that's a sign that that person is being trafficked.
And what are some of the things that a person can do if they suspect that somebody they know is being trafficked?
Contact law enforcement or call the human trafficking hotline number. 1-888-3737-888.
Okay. And so how common is this? Because you were going to school and you lived in a neighborhood where, in other words, you would have come into contact with adults that had no idea that there was a whole ring of other adults that were participating in this. And so in the work that you do, how common do you find it is that people are being trafficked right around us without us even knowing it?
It's very common in the United States. A lot of people think that it happens just in other countries, but in the United States, I can't remember the exact numbers, but around the world, it's estimated that there's 27 to 30 million people being bought and sold around the world right now.
Wow, that's just tremendous. So that means that, I mean, how likely do you think it is that that maybe we've seen people that are going through that without even knowing it?
I think it's very likely that possibly everybody has come into contact with people, but didn't realize what was happening.
Wow, and that is so important then that you do continue to share and to speak out, because so many people are not aware that this is a problem or how prevalent it is or what are some of the things to look for. And so my understanding is that you even do workshops with law enforcement now.
Yes, I do workshops for law enforcement and even juvenile justice workers, and I share my story. And because a lot of victims, they don't identify victims, and so they want rather too afraid of law happening. And so what I do is share my story and why I was afraid, and like I felt like emotionally that will enforcement assist victims when they come into contact with them.
Right, so that they're there to help, and there's no reason to fear involvement with law enforcement. And so, can you tell our listeners where they can find you, where they can find your resources on the internet?
Yes. Well, you can be on Facebook, and then you have to have a for my ministry. It's called Slaves No More. That is my name, SavannahParvu.wordpress.com.
Okay, so they can find you at SavannahParvu.wordpress.com, and your Facebook ministry is called Slaves No More, and that's where they can find you online. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Savannah, for being on the Joe and Rosa program today.
Thank you for having me.